Well, in about 15 or 20 minutes, we're gonna finish up the war. It's almost over. Have you looked at the keywords at all? Other than to go into shock because, oh, look at all those words. You know most of them. Well, you'll have a chance to ask about it. We'll do that as soon as we are joined by the other classes. Wow, we're getting Hale Center seizing the entire screen. Now they get to see themselves on their own screen. They get to see you guys. You're in the picture. I can't see you. You're not wearing bright enough colored shirt for me to see you in the back of their screen. I can see you guys are on there. Bear with me for a minute. I'll be right back.
Or spiritually, but I'm physically here.
And I'm still tired.
But I'm wide awake. I'm in my bed. Where it's hammering through.
Well, I can see an empty classroom there. Post is there. Hale Center's there. And the hookah. I guess they are, maybe they're having a brief assembly before school starts, because it's football day. I don't know if they played yesterday or they played today.
Did you see the NFL game yesterday?
I didn't watch the end of it, actually. Unbelievable, hard to believe, but I work, and sometimes I'm tired when I get home, and I got relaxed and watched that, and I just fell asleep. Don't tell me the end of it, I have it recorded.
My dad did that. He said he watched, as long as he could. And whenever I got home, he was asleep on the couch.
Yeah, well, I wasn't on the couch, I was sleeping in an appropriate place. Hey, everybody. Post looks like they're alive and well. You guys all ready for this? This is about the last 20 minutes of the American Revolution, and then we'll talk about stuff on the keyword list. And I guess I'll have this recorded so that Tahoka, I don't know where they are, the room's there, but I can't see any people in it. They can look at the recording. You all know that you can look at recordings if you want of these classes. All you have to do is send me a note and say you want to look at them, and I'll send you a URL for it. I've already given you the URL, but it's probably buried in your notes somewhere. So, we're talking about the Southern Strategy. In 1778, the British leave Philadelphia, and their main force is now concentrated in New York again. General Clinton's the commander, General Howe's gone. Washington has gone through a horrible winter at Valley Forge, which turned really bad in December and got even worse in the early months of 1778. And Generals Clinton and Cornwallis decide that they're going to go south, looking for loyalists, to recruit loyalists to add to their troop strength, and also because loyalists know the land better and that sort of thing. And so they're going to go all the way down south. Clinton will stay there for a while and then go back to New York, and Cornwallis will be in charge. He's got some other units down there with his main unit. But the main thing they're doing when they go to the south, and you need to remember this, the main thing, their strategy is all about going down to recruit loyalists to join their cause. Because whatever it is they've been doing so far, it hasn't been working well. They've already lost two generals. One was General Burgoyne, who was captured. One was General Howe, who quit because he was angry because he was getting conflicting orders from England. And they were blaming him for General Burgoyne's surrender. So he quit and went back to England. Got some questions? Okay. There's a disturbance in the front row of my room, but we will deal with it. Okay. Let's look at the Southern Strategy here. If it'll ever come up. There you go. Bless your little heart. Now I'll get it up for you guys to look at. You all have this. It's that third one in Unit 4 lectures. That's Cornwallis surrendering to General Howe. I bet General Howe paid to have that painting done. Anyway, it makes him look pretty great. It's not showing? There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. The guy in the white get up is Colonel Daniel Morgan. The guy in the very middle of the picture that looks like a great hero is Horatio Gates, and his best skill was bragging about his own accomplishments. The guys that really won this battle at Saratoga, of course, were Daniel Morgan, General Benjamin Lincoln, and General Benedict Arnold. We talked about the significance of Saratoga, and I want to make a point of that again. It's a turning point in the war, maybe the main turning point in the war, because it brought the French into the war on our side. We signed an alliance with them. They agreed to send soldiers over. agreed to use their Navy to support us. They agreed to send us more money. So Saratoga is a big thing. We'll talk about ID questions later on, and I'll give you Saratoga as an example. That's a picture of Washington looking at the poor frozen troops at Valley Forge. And I kind of brushed over this, but there were some very interesting people with Washington while I was up there. Of course, we know about some of them. Not that guy. Where did that go? Hello? I added this. One was a fellow by the name of Lafayette. We talked about Lafayette before. One was a fellow named DeKalb, who was kind of the mentor for Lafayette. By this time, Lafayette's a major general, so is DeKalb. DeKalb's a Prussian, Lafayette's a Frenchman. Who else was there? And then there was the Baron von Steuben, who was a Prussian, who came over there, got there in February of 1778 and started training the American troops. Well, he came to visit Washington. First he went to the Continental Congress. He did know something about being a soldier. He'd been Frederick the Great's personal aide. Frederick the Great was arguably the most skilled military leader in the world at that time. He was already dead by this time. At any rate, von Steuben is going to teach the Americans about simple things like how to make a camp, how to have sanitation so you don't all die of diseases, how to train, how to act in a military manner, and basic tactics. He's going to train about 100 men, and then those 100 men are going to go train more men. And the end result of this, Washington quickly sees this man's valuable. He writes a letter to the Continental Congress, says, make this man the Inspector General of the whole Continental Army. And they do. They pretty much did what Washington told them to do. And he's going to be important to Washington for the rest of the war. We talked about the Battle of Monmouth, when Washington attacked the rear guard of the British as they were leaving Philadelphia. The British also sent, I don't understand exactly what's going on with this machine, but I actually added some things to it that aren't there for some reason. The British actually sent a commission over to try and negotiate with the Continental Congress. And they offered the Continental Congress what you call autonomy. In other words, you could run your own affairs and you could have special representation in Parliament. But the Continental Congress got word that the British were about to pull out of Philadelphia and head back to New York. And they decided they weren't going to settle for anything but total independence. So that commission went for naught. And all along, late in 1778, and in the years that followed, the British are grabbing all the seaports that they can along the American coast. So they've got, I think, Norfolk, Virginia. They've got Savannah, Georgia. In fact, the Americans, Washington's going to send General Benjamin Lincoln down south, put him in charge of the South, tell him take Savannah back. He's going to send with him Casimir Pulaski, the Polish cavalry man that organized the Continental Cavalry. Pulaski is going to get killed trying to attack Savannah. General Lincoln's going to be forced to retreat to Charleston, South Carolina. Then he's going to be surrounded by the British. And he's going to finally surrender, for which he feels really, really ashamed. He's the only American general to surrender in the war. But before he surrendered, he dillied and dallied and negotiated with the British and stretched it out long enough to let all of his important men get away. And the British were really angry when they finally came in to accept the surrender. And there wasn't anybody there but General Lincoln and some men. And they didn't treat him very well because of that. But eventually, they're going to give General Lincoln back to us in exchange for a British officer who was captured. And from that point on, Lincoln will be pretty close to Washington. Then Congress is going to send a general to replace General Lincoln down there. And for political reasons, I suppose, they chose General Horatio Gates, the guy that was in theory responsible for the victory at Saratoga, but wasn't really responsible because Benedict Arnold, General Benjamin Lincoln, and Daniel Morgan did all the heavy lifting for him. He just took credit for it. He's going to head down south. He'll have Baron de Kalb with him as an advisor, and another general, that was Lafayette's friend. Apparently he didn't listen to anything Baron de Kalb told him, because they just marched straight down there, straight down to Camden, South Carolina. And the British let them come until they got all the way down to Camden, South Carolina. Then General Cornwallis whacked his column like nobody's business. General Gates was last seen riding over the horizon, escaping on his way to Virginia. He left his troops there. Catch up with me if you can, and ran. I really don't care much for General Gates. We lost all the artillery that he brought with him. We lost all the supplies he brought with him. Quite a few men were killed. Militiamen scattered all over the countryside. Some Continentals were killed and captured. A lot of wounded. Big disaster. Now Washington's going to appoint a man to go down and take Gates's place instead of letting Continental Congress mess around with it. And he's going to send his trusted Nathaniel Greene down there. And he tells Greene, when you go down there, do not get in a face-to-face battle with Cornwallis. Just mess with him. Wherever there's an opportunity to sweep up a small unit, grab him. Whenever there's an opportunity to do damage to him, if he gets too far inland and the supply line is stretched out, attack his supply line. Don't get involved in a face-to-face conflict, because we need you there for a long term, and we don't want you to wipe your own force out. So Greene's going to follow those directions. He's also going to stop off in Virginia on the way down there and get Daniel Morgan. Daniel Morgan quit. Daniel Morgan went home because all of these political guys got promoted to general when he was still a colonel. He was a big hero at Saratoga. He felt it was a slap in the face. He didn't betray his country, though. He just went home. On the other hand, Benedict Arnold, who was mad about the same thing, got a job running Philadelphia, married a woman there, and it turns out the woman had a boyfriend who was a British intelligence officer, and she's going to introduce him to Benedict Arnold, and Benedict Arnold's going to sell out. It's a complicated story. I'm making it sound simple. It wasn't simple. Arnold was permanently crippled from 2 battles, Quebec and Saratoga. He was a bitter man. He used his own personal money in the Battle of Quebec, and the Continental Congress never gave him his money back. So he was pretty much poverty-stricken. He married this really nice-looking babe who was a high-priced, what you call high-maintenance type of lady, and he couldn't afford it. And that's when a combination of his anger at the Continental Congress and the need for money kind of showed a weakness in his character. And he sold some military plans, the approach to West Point, to the British, and he agreed on condition that they would make him a general in the British Army. And they agreed quickly, and he became a brigadier general in the British Army. He's going to move down to Virginia. He's going to be in charge of the loyalists down there. So the British, even Washington, knew that he was a good general. I mean, Washington refused to believe that he was being a spy until someone actually put a letter from Major John Andre to Benedict Arnold giving him instructions on what to do next. Washington tried to catch Benedict Arnold, but he got to his ship on the Delaware River and escaped. They caught John Andre. He was convicted of being a spy, and they strung him up. It's kind of a sad story. John Andre was doing his job. Washington and people felt sorry for him, but the rules were, you catch a spy, you hang him. They'd already done that to one of ours, to a fellow named Nathan Hale, when the fighting was just ending in New York. They caught him he was a school teacher. They caught him spying for Washington, and they strung him up. That's the British. So this was kind of payback for Nathan Hale, I guess. There's a statue, by the way, of Nathan Hale. Anybody know where it is? It's outside the front door of the headquarters of the CIA. Over in Virginia, in Langley, Virginia. At any rate, while all this high-level command stuff is going on, two British officers, one named Patrick Ferguson, he's a major, and one named Bannister Tarleton, he's the lieutenant colonel, cavalryman. They had the job of going out into inland in North and South Carolina and recruiting loyalists to the British cause. Late in 1780, Patrick Ferguson had rounded up about 800 loyalists and was trying to pressure some loyalists way out in the western part of South Carolina, out near the Great Smoky Mountains. They were called the Men Over the Mountain. That was what people called them, kind of a popular name. They were people that didn't want to be in the revolution on either side. They just wanted everyone to leave them alone. And he pushed them a little bit harder than you should push people like that. And suddenly realized, maybe I better go somewhere else quickly. And he took his 800 men and headed east, near the border of North and South Carolina, got up on top of a mountain called Kings Mountain, figured that's pretty safe and easy to defend. And the men over the mountain came after him. Now there were young guys and there were old guys. Old guys who were French and Indian wars with the commanders, but they were old, fat, and slow. And the young guys just virtually ran up the side of that mountain and attacked these 800 loyalists and the few British soldiers that was with them. Before their officers could catch up and say, you can take their surrender, you don't have to kill them. And they pretty much slaughtered all 800 of them. They killed Patrick Ferguson. They killed his girlfriend. Go figure, he brought his girlfriend with him on this mission. Stuck them in shallow graves and disappeared back into the mountains again. Don't bother us. A few months later, General Greene is right along the border of Virginia and North Carolina. Then he's going to start moving south. And in January of 1781, Daniel Morgan, who's joined him because Greene went by, called on Morgan and said, I need you, please come back. Got him promoted to brigadier general. And General Morgan is going to split off from General Greene's group, the main part of the army that was replacing what Horatio Gates lost, and set up a little trap because he knew about this cavalry colonel named Bannister Tarleton, and Tarleton had built himself kind of his own personal cavalry, 800 men, a little bit over 800 men, a lot of them loyalists, but also British dragoons, British mounted soldiers. And at a place along the North Carolina-South Carolina border called Cowpens, named after a stockyard that was there, Cowpens, you got that? He's going to set up a position and he's going to sucker Bannister Tarleton into attacking him. He's got somewhere in the vicinity just over 1,000 men, and there's different numbers on this because it depends on who you count. He's got Continental soldiers and he's got militia, and he's got some mounted cavalry too. Some of the remnants of the cavalry that Casimir Pulaski organized for the Continental Army. And what he tells the militia is, you guys are going to be in front, and they're not real happy about that. Militia don't like being in the front. They're not trained soldiers. But he's going to arrange his force along a hilly area. There's one kind of line of hills or ridge line, whatever you want to call it, and he's going to put the militia kind of back behind the crest of that hill line with lookouts up on top of the hill to watch for the British. And then the next row of hills behind, he's going to put his Continental Army down. Have them dig in. He's got some little pop gun cannons and some things. He's got some cavalry, and he's going to tell them, just get out in the woods. Stay out of sight. Let's see if I can get a diagram of this. It's kind of neat. That's a diagram of it. The cavalry's on both sides. And what happens, and what he tells the militia is, all you have to do is aim carefully, make sure that Tarleton knows you're there, aim carefully, fire one volley, and run like hell. Right back through the Continental soldiers' lines. And it worked. Tarleton was he was a pretty good cavalry leader, but he was a little bit headlong. I've seen the same kind of attack in other places, sometimes used against us. Sometimes we suckered out. In this case, Tarleton attacks what he thinks are a bunch of militia who are running like rabbits. He goes charging in with a force of over 800 men, all mounted men, to mop up these provincials, and runs right into the line of Continental soldiers who were sitting there waiting for him. Then his line suddenly staggers, slows down, mills around, they're under fire. It's a lot harder for a mounted person to fire and hit something than it is for the people on the ground. And when the confusion gets really bad, then Daniel Morgan tells his cavalry to attack on both sides of them. And basically, they wiped out that entire force. I've got the numbers here just for fun. Daniel Morgan lost 25 killed and 124 wounded. Bannister Tarleton, who got away, by the way, he had a fast horse, lost 110 killed, 229 wounded, 829 captured or missing. Now, if you put the Battle of Cowpens together with the Battle of Kings Mountain, and you think about why did the British come down there to start with? To recruit loyalists. What have we just sent the loyalists? What kind of a message have we just sent them? It's not healthy to be a loyalist, basically, right? Two groups of over 800 men have been wiped out. This is going to get Cornwallis to thinking, and Cornwallis has another problem, because this battle caused Cornwallis to lose his eyes and ears. That's what the cavalry is. They didn't have things like drones and airplanes and helicopters. So the way you could find the enemy was to send your cavalry out. Now he doesn't have a cavalry. About 20 men left. And he's going to stagger blindly around in that area. And later on, see if I can fix this. I don't know if I can or not. Yeah, I can. It's okay, let's make it bigger. Nathaniel Greene has the habit of popping across the Virginia border. There's some rivers and all that, and hiding behind him so that Cornwallis isn't eager to attack him. But he pops back across the border in North Carolina and goes to a place called Guilford Courthouse. There's a battle there. And then he does what Washington told him you shouldn't do. He gets in a face-to-face battle with Cornwallis. He's defeated. But he withdraws from the battlefield in good order. His men don't scatter. He doesn't lose his artillery. Nothing. He just leaves. But the British can say, well, we won, except the British suffered pretty heavy casualties. So Cornwallis is going to pull back all the way back to the coast to get resupplied, to rest his men up. And then he's going to turn north, and he's going to head up into Virginia to join Benedict Arnold and his big group of loyalists up there. And he's going to go up through Richmond. No one's defending Richmond, so he just walks through Richmond. And it finally turns again towards the coast. The British always like to be close to the coast because that's where their navy was available. And he's going to go to a little town called Yorktown, and behind it, it's got water that the British Navy can come in and help him out, supply him, or if he needs to get away, they can pick him up and take him. What he doesn't know is he's been tailed by the Marquis de Lafayette with a unit with instructions, don't make contact with him, just keep an eye on him. and send messages back to General Washington up in New York what he's up to. Because Washington doesn't want Cornwallis to go all the way north and come up behind him. Lafayette sends a message up to Washington, I think we've got him. Told him where he was. By this time, the French general had arrived in Long Island. He'd been there for a while. I'll put the picture up there. I haven't switched it yet. There's General Rochambeau. He did a pretty good job. He was in Long Island. Washington was outside of New York. Washington's able to take 7,000 of his own men. He had to leave some guarding New York. Take 7,000 of his own men. Rochambeau brings 8,000 Frenchmen, and they march south. Strange thing about their march south is Washington's got no money. The Continental Congress never gives them enough money. And when they come to big rivers they need to cross, he doesn't have enough money to pay to get his troops ferried across. But he's got a man named Robert Morris, the guy that paid for most of the war, along with him. And Robert Morris keeps shelling out money so that Washington can get down to Yorktown. So far so good, and Cornwallis is not really worried at this stage of the game. I don't know if he knew Washington was on the way or not, but he always had the British Navy. Except the British Navy had been in the war for a number of years. Their ships had not been home, had not been refitted, had not been cleaned and caulked. The bottoms of the ships were covered with barnacles and seaweed, so they were a lot slower than a good ship. And there was only a squadron of them, not a large group, just enough to support Cornwallis. And lo and behold, a French fleet from the Caribbean come up, drive the British ships away, and now they're the ones that are behind Cornwallis. And they're not going to be helping him. In fact, they land some Marines from the French ships. They land some artillery pieces to augment what Washington has. And now they begin a siege. And it goes from about September into October. And they're doing a classic European-style siege, you know, where you dig trenches, and then you dig trench lines towards your objective, and then you put artillery in there, and then you move your trench line forward, and you just keep squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. About this time, Hamilton, who's always wanted to have his own regiment, Washington finally says, okay, you can have a regiment, and he's going to start attacking some of the outposts, the British outposts. And when they get close enough to Cornwallis, and he realizes the French fleet's behind him and there's no way to get away, he realizes he's got to surrender. And on the 19th day of October, 1781, Cornwallis is going to surrender to Washington. Washington did a strange thing when Cornwallis sent out a messenger and said he was ready to surrender. And they lined the troops up, you know, and did it the old-fashioned way to accept the surrender. The Americans were there. The English soldiers filed by and stacked their weapons. Believe it or not, they actually had a band. I find that hard to believe, but military brings bands along a lot. When I was in the Vietnam War, we had a band with us. Not in my unit. I only had a company, but we had a band because when we went out in operations and when we came back from the operation, there'd be a band playing for you. Why, I don't know. I mean, nobody cared, but we had a band. The band at this time, as the British band played The World Turned Upside Down, General Washington didn't take the surrender. He sent General Benjamin Lincoln to accept the surrender. He's the one that had to surrender to the British before. He sent Benjamin Lincoln out to take Cornwallis' surrender. Cornwallis got a stomachache, kind of like you get a stomachache if you don't want to take the exam, things like that, and sent out his second in command to hand his sword over. Washington didn't take his sword. He said, keep your sword. Cornwallis is now a prisoner. The British have one of our diplomats who was supposed to be an ambassador to Holland by the name of Henry Lawrence. They have him on a prison hulk. So we tell the British, we'll give you Cornwallis if you give us Henry Lawrence. And they did. They swapped. Henry Lawrence is freed. First they had to feed him up because he looked like death warmed over from being on that prison hulk. British did not treat their prisoners very well. They didn't feed them. A lot of them starved to death. A lot of them caught smallpox. They were all crammed together on ships off the shore. Some of them as far over as England. In the case of Henry Lawrence, he was on a mastless ship that was anchored off the shore in England. So, Lord North gets word of this. It happened in October, late in October. He won't really be able to take action on it or hear it until early in the following year. As soon as he hears it, he said, well, it's all over. We can't take another defeat like this. He wants to quit his job as Prime Minister. They won't accept his offer to quit. But early in 1872, it's going to be politically obvious that the war can't go on, and Parliament, the House of Commons, is going to vote against the war. And a few weeks later, or maybe a week later, they're going to authorize the king to send his people to negotiate with the Americans. They're going to negotiate in France. The Continental Congress names John Adams, John Jay, he was our ambassador to Spain at the time, I think. Benjamin Franklin, who was in France. Henry Lawrence, the guy that was supposed to be the ambassador to Holland, who had been on the prison hulk. That must have been fun for him to be able to stare at the British and say, you know, he who laughs loudest. William Temple Franklin went too. He was Benjamin Franklin's nephew. They negotiated. Now, it's kind of strange because we had this alliance with the French, and we had agreed that neither the Americans nor the French would negotiate separately with the British to end the war. But the French, behind our backs, thinking that we didn't know about it, were trying to negotiate with the British for the last year. They were asking for some concessions, like some territory in North America again. Remember, they lost all of theirs. And the British weren't listening to it because the British thought that they were going to wipe up in the South. So the British wouldn't negotiate with them. So the Americans negotiate, and they're going to come up with kind of a preliminary agreement. Now the French are going to have to come and negotiate too, separately. And the Spanish are also going to have to negotiate because they were at war with Britain, even though they weren't our direct allies. About 2 years before, the French and the Spanish had put together a giant fleet, while the British Navy was almost all in North America. They decided to invade England. And things looked really bad for England because they didn't have enough naval force. But I guess you could say heaven intervened. The French and Spanish sailors all caught smallpox, and they had to evacuate and go back home. But now the Spanish and the French are going to have to negotiate, and the Americans have already negotiated, and you put those three treaties together, and you got something that we call the Peace of Paris. If I'm talking about the end of the French and Indian War, I talk about the Treaty of Paris. If I'm talking about the end of the American Revolution, I call it the Peace of Paris. That's what it's called in the history books too. It will be finalized in September of 1783. Especially the French and Spanish had a lot of other issues to settle with the British. Here's the conditions. Britain agreed to recognize the independence of the United States. Britain agreed that the United States owned at least from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River, and could use the Mississippi River. They didn't agree to anything out west, and they were really fuzzy about what the northern border and the southern borders were. They also agreed, and I always find this funny to be in a treaty that ends the American Revolution. They agreed for the Americans to be allowed to fish off the coast of Newfoundland and the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and they were allowed to actually land on islands out there to clean their fish before they brought them home. That sounds like a kind of a silly thing to have in an important treaty like that, but this is a multi-million-dollar issue. And if you don't believe that, if you watch the news carefully in your lifetime, about every 4 years we have to renegotiate that particular agreement with the Canadians now. So that's something that it doesn't sound important to you or me, but it was apparently very important to them. So, I've got a question for you. Did we defeat the British Army? 2 people in here say yes. What say you? How about Hale Center? How about Post? Did we defeat the British Army? At the end of the war, the British Army was still in control of Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, Norfolk, Virginia, and New York City. Does that sound like they're defeated? So what kind of victory did we have? We had a political victory because the government of England and the people of England, and especially the merchants of England, were sick and tired of this war, and basically they told the government, if you can't win it, get out of it. That's how we won the war. That's how we won the war. Last British troops are going to leave Manhattan Island on the 24th of November, 1783. A couple weeks later, the last British troops are going to leave their main base on Staten Island and Long Island on the 4th of December, 1783. On the 23rd of December, by the way, the Continental Congress had moved a lot of times during the war. They're now in Annapolis, Maryland at the time. George Washington will appear there and resign his commission, say, I've done my job, thank you for the honor, I'm going home. Get on his horse, and he made it all the way back to Mount Vernon in time for Christmas. I didn't realize when I first studied this how he got to Mount Vernon, because I thought that the Continental Congress was in Philadelphia. But they moved all the way over to Annapolis, Maryland by the end of the war. Always one step ahead of the English. So, there endeth the war. And we're having an exam on Monday. And we have a big long list of keywords. And I want you to focus on that list of keywords. And somebody that sat in my other class over in that corner right where you're sitting said, Mr. Hunt, what kind of questions will we have? Of course, my answer is very difficult questions. There will be 40 multiple choice questions, worth 2 points each. There will be 5 ID questions, where you have to write a short answer. I'm not talking about a paragraph, I'm like maybe 1 line, 2 lines to answer the question. Let me give you an example of one. Because in these questions you have to tell me 2 things. There's 2 halves to the question. One half is, what does this term mean, or who is this person, or whatever pops up in the question. The other thing you have to tell me is, why do we care? What's important about it? What's significant about it? For example, if I said, the battles of Saratoga, and you could tell me what it is, it's some battles in New York between the British and the Americans that the Americans won. If you're really good, you'd tell me what year it was. 1777. Why was it important? I told you that at the beginning of this class period. Why was it important? It was a turning point in the war because, and you need to put the because in there, because it brought the French into the war on our side. And that helped us particularly with the Battle of Yorktown. You got the idea now how to do 2 halves of an ID question? There'll only be 5. And if you carefully watch on Blackboard, sometime maybe really, really late tonight, I will give you a list of 10 terms. They may be names, they may be events, whatever. And I will pick 5 out of that to put on the test. So you're not, trying to figure out what to study. Okay, that's one thing to remember. At 6 o'clock on Sunday evening, I will turn on Collaborate Ultra. Before that time, I'll put an announcement in Blackboard. I'll say, use this URL. I'll also probably send it out as emails. Use this URL. Yeah, well, I'll do both at the same time. I can push a button and do both. If Blackboard's not working, then I'll figure out a way to email. And what I will tell you is this URL, if you go to that URL and hit the go button on it, you will be in the middle of a town meeting. And you will have the opportunity, if you want, to ask questions about terms that you couldn't figure out. If we have time and enough people are interested, we can go through the keywords and scratch out the ones that I don't think matter as much to make it easier. So it's worth your while. And the thing is, since you're going to do it at home, hopefully you're not in school on Sunday evening, since you're going to do it at home, you can turn on your camera if you want. You don't have to. You can turn on your microphone. You don't even have to type. You can talk. If you don't have a mic, that's fine. You can chat. But I'll be on screen, more or less awake. I'll put the football game on recorder. All the sacrifices I make. Sometimes you get big groups and they're really fun, and you're going to see maybe students from all of my classes. So there could be as many as 130 or 40 students participating. There might only be 5 or 6. Who knows? Some people just don't like studying. But I'll stay on, unless there's nobody there, I'll stay on for 2 hours. So you can have my attention between 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock Sunday afternoon. It's not mandatory, you don't have to do it. I won't hold it against you if you do. I won't cry for you if you fail the exam. Study hard. Take it seriously, and everybody get a good grade. I don't grade on the curve. So if everybody gets an A, fine with me. If everybody gets an F, I regret it, but fine with me. I don't dumb down my tests. So study hard, study the keywords carefully. And by the way, if anybody owes me a quiz, you better get that quiz in over the weekend. Otherwise, it's going to show up in your quiz average as a 0, and a 0 plays havoc with a good quiz average. So, get her done, and let's all do well. Yes, ma'am, question?
You mentioned something earlier in the lecture that they bury them in a shallow grave. What does that mean?
I was talking about Patrick Ferguson and his girlfriend. They didn't waste much time digging a hole in the Rocky Mountain top. They just scraped some ground out, stuffed both of them in it, and threw some dirt on them.
That's what I thought.
They weren't very nice. That happened to one of our people on Bunker Hill. Remember Dr. Warren?
Yeah.
The British did that, and then they dug him up and chopped him up after he was dead for 2 weeks. So you wonder, we're talking about supposedly civilized people.
Yeah,
That doesn't sound like very civilized behavior, and it also is kind of pointless.
a little bit, yeah.
Why kill a dead man? Maybe they were afraid he was a zombie or something. I don't know. Anyway, anybody got questions out here? Here's your chance. You've got the keywords. If you've got questions, ask away. Nobody? Are those really people, or is that like those baseball games where they've just put the little plastic thing, the little... Oh, a couple of them have moved. One of them's sleeping in the front row there in Hale Center. Oh, there he is. Oh, you heard me. Oh. Oh, you were just looking at the tabletop, and you weren't sleeping. Okay. It's a very interesting tabletop, isn't it? Hale Center eats right after this class. Yeah, they bring food, right? So they're all hungry. They're eager to leave. All of our schools do breakfast. Post, do you guys get food?
I'll go and go do breakfast.
Just nod your head or wave your hand. Do you get food in the morning? No. Boy, they're mean. Somebody's nodding yes, what are you saying, that what they give you isn't really food? Is that what you're saying? Like eating pizza at 8 o'clock in the morning and stuff like that?
Cold pizza in the morning.
Cold pizza in the morning, yeah. When you get to college, you'll realize that cold pizza in the morning is
I
a
just have
delicacy.
breakfast, you know.
People in this room are eating crunchy things as we speak. Okay, I'm gonna turn this off if nobody has questions. I'm available on Blackboard, on Message Center. If you've got questions, send them that way if you're embarrassed to ask them in front of your friends. And I'll be pretty much available on and off over the weekend, but not every minute because I have a life and other things to do. Okay, that's it. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. Win your football games.
Your conference is scheduled to end in 2 minutes. Your conference is now over. Goodbye.